various podcasts, you mentioned that he would gift you Yankees memorabilia. What is your favorite Yankees memorabilia from your grandfather?
It's crazy that you know that. On the other side of my room, actually, I have a
I want to
Yankees.
reverse it with you. Do you have any failures you're looking forward to?
It's a good question. And I think that success is just further along the road of failure. And so, and one of the, going back to like reframing experiences, I used to do everything to avoid failure. Now I just see it as feedback.
Do what you can with what you have where you are. Teddy Roosevelt, courtesy of Squire Bill Widener. Quote 2, true beauty in life often doesn't look like beauty when you're in the middle of it. Quote 3, my own path is going to be my own path. Quote 4, may not be my fault, but still my responsibility. And quote 5, last and certainly not least, all that matters is how you feel about yourself when you are by yourself. Tom Bilyeu. My guest in this episode of Passing the Torch is James Brackin IV, the host of the You Can Too podcast. With this podcast, James shares inspiring stories from exceptional humans to explore into what they have overcome, are currently overcoming, and shows how you can too. Here's a quick background about James. James also became a personal coach at age 17 when he realized after losing his father and uncle, who both passed away at the age of 37, and also his grandfather a few months before his actual retirement, that we have so little time. Without further ado, Passing the Torch with James Brackin IV starts now. First and foremost, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me. How was that intro?
Martin, you're awesome, man. Thank you so much. Two of those quotes sounded very familiar, and I think for a reason. And just really grateful for your time and your energy and your presence, man. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Actually, the Teddy Roosevelt, that's my favorite quote. But the other four were things I've heard you say in podcasts. The Tom Bilyeu, I mentioned that I've listened to about 15 podcast episodes of you over the past 2 or 3 weeks. And that includes where you were guest on episode 2, the Justin Shank episode. I listened to you on that one. And there was, I forget what else, what other,
So
when you
many.
were a guest. Yeah, so many. But the Tom Bilyeu quote, you have referenced probably 4 or 5
1,000
times.
times.
Yeah, now,
Literally
recently.
Right before this conversation. Yeah.
And then separately, the other ones, they weren't necessarily quotes that you opened up an episode with or closed it out. It was just as in the conversation, as I was listening to these episodes, I would just write it down. And I'll actually send some screenshots of my actual notes about you, because I have a garage gym, and I have a notebook out there, and I listen to podcasts. Whenever I hear something, I'll write it down in my notebook and take note of it. But yeah, those are 4 of the 5 were all you, my guy.
Yeah, man. Makes sense. Yeah, they definitely sounded familiar. Like I said, I was on a podcast right before this, and I go back to that Tom Bilyeu quote very often. That is for sure. So it makes a lot of sense.
Hey, why is life great right now?
Because I'm looking for it.
That's
I
good.
just say that. Yeah, life just, I'm looking for all the reasons it is great, man. Like I really can't see in this exact moment, everything's perfect really in this moment.
How perfect was Kauai? Because I think I saw that you spent 4 months out there earlier this year.
Yeah, my entire life, Hawaii was always like on the dream board. It was actually my vision board when I made a vision board a few years ago. And it's funny because I grew up watching Hawaii Five-0, and it was like the only thing that I could watch past 9 p.m. when I was growing up. And
Are you talking about the most recent version?
I have to reference that because a lot of people say like the 1970s you weren't here for it, but yeah, the newer version of Hawaii Five-0. And on my vision board I have Kauai on my vision board, but I always thought I wanted to go to Hawaii, like Oahu, which is not Kauai. And on my vision board I find out that it was the Nepali coast, which is where I went earlier this year, and it was.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual place, man. It's unlike anything else. It doesn't feel like it's on this earth. I will definitely be moving there in my life. That's for sure.
So I lived there for 4.5 years. I'm in Ohio now, and I'm active duty military, but prior to Ohio, I was in Hawaii for 4.5 years. And I want to share with you, next time I don't know if you still watch 5-0, but I was on about 8 different episodes because I'm an actor as well. And I have some speaking roles and some featured extra roles throughout the series run. So, yeah.
So sick. I met another friend of mine out there that also was in, and he was like so proud of it. He showed me like the 5 or 10 seconds of him pulling a dead body out of the wall, and I was like, I remember that exact episode. It's so cool, man. And it really, Hawaii really is a special place. I think everyone should go there before they pass. That's for sure.
I also saw recently that I'm not sure how recent, but you also traveled outside of the country for the first time to Costa Rica. How was that experience, and why is traveling overseas important for someone's growth?
Yeah, I went in January and February of this year. I went for about 2 weeks. Didn't know anything about Costa Rica. Honestly, I wish I did more prep before I went because I went in the middle of San Jose, so I'm right in the middle of the city, like hours away from any of the ocean. And man, I stayed there for 2 weeks. Oh, that was my Airbnb. There was no way around it. I think it's so powerful because I don't know a lick of Spanish by any means, and I just heard so many times how empowering a solo travel is, especially to a place where you're unfamiliar with. And so I thought I'd never been out of the country before. I hadn't even, at the time, I hadn't even been to the West Coast.
Wow.
And so this was just like a massive leap, completely by myself. I knew nothing. I just knew I wanted to get uncomfortable. And so I show up there, and I mean, I get scammed the first 10 minutes I'm there, whatever it is, by a taxi instead of getting an Uber because I didn't have my Wi-Fi set up or my service set up and everything. But I think it's powerful, man, because I came back just with this sense of, I guess I can do this perspective even more than I already did, just because you continue to show yourself that, a lot of people are fearful of other parts of the world, but I think everywhere is so similar yet so different in the same sense, but it
Yeah.
just shows you a lot about yourself.
Yeah, it's a certain taken from someone. I'm about to be 43 years old here in a couple weeks, but from someone who's traveled a lot, it gives you. It's definitely a life hack, and it makes you more confident.
Yeah.
It's something. Yeah, I think everyone should have to do in their life is travel overseas. No, that's really cool, man. I want to just kind of use that to transition to your podcast. You can too, because again, it's so good, man. And I feel like a year from now or 2 years from now, everyone's gonna be like, "Oh my God, James Brackin's the guy." But why did you start your journey so young? Because 17, right, is when you kind of started your podcast and everything. If is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why did you start so young versus waiting until more? Because a lot of people will say they're gonna wait because of projected life experience based on age. But yeah, why did you start so young?
Yeah, it's funny too because I started in my car not doing interviews. My first 105 episodes were solo. No microphone. I was literally recording on GarageBand on my computer. And it's so funny looking back now. I wish I documented more of it, but I think for me, the real lever that pushed me to do it was investing in myself. So I became a coach when I was 17, started my podcast around the same time. I invested more money than I had in my bank account by like more than double. And so I was forced to show up to make coaching work, to even just pay off the coaching program in itself. I joined the coaching program to become a coach, nevertheless, really recognizing I didn't know what a coach was. I just knew I wanted to do something that was impacting other people. And so in the process of recognizing now I have to start posting on social media, which was terrifying for me at the time, was this awareness of, well, if I want to start posting on Instagram to, get clients or get my content out there, might as well start the podcast now. And so that was just kind of like the needle to it. But I think for me, similar to why anyone does anything in life that they really feel is something that's meant for them, is it was a calling, man. I mean, my entire life, it was like an internal narrative I told myself was you can too. I mean, anything that we think of in this world, and I don't think this is talked about enough. It's to this day, every single thing that we look at, the headphones you're using, the computer I'm using to connect you with, was a thought in someone's mind. And the fact that we can transmute that into the world, into actually something, like I couldn't tell you how my computer works right now. That still blows me away. Like I just genuinely don't know how it works. Like we have more power in our phone than the first rocket that ever went to space. How does that make any sense? I'm not sure. But the fact that we can think it and then do it was just empowering to me, and just seeing how expansive the world really is. And I think the thing that holds most people back is just their lack of belief. And so if I could instill some belief into people, I think that's so much of the foundation of life, really.
I love the word you used, transmute. So how do you get someone who doesn't have that self-belief? How do you get them to transmute that thought or that desire into trusting themselves in order to invest in themselves?
I think two things. One is an open-mindedness, like a state of questioning. I think the challenge with most people in life is they get to a place where they're so solidified in their belief system that is what life is. Joe Dispenza, I read his book, was one of the first books that really changed my life, was Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. When I recognized that we're just going through life based on this memory of who we are, of who we think we are. It's not even who we actually are. And so just the first emphasis there is just the awareness and questioning of what you believe to be true, because it's probably not true. It might be true for you, and it might serve you in a way, but not to your best interest. And so just to question, to start. After we've questioned, we have to get some kind of evidence. I mean, we're not going to believe in ourselves just off of, hoping kind of thing. You have to give some evidence to yourself. So for me, like investing in myself, maybe I didn't have the evidence of, getting clients when I first started, or having the life experience, but I invested into myself. I was 17 years old, investing $8,000 into a coaching program that I didn't have $4,000 in my bank account.
Yeah.
So that in itself was like, hell yeah, I have a lot of self-doubt, and I have a lot of imposter syndrome, but I just did the exact same thing that people in their 40s and 50s just did as well. So
Yeah.
that in itself, I think, gave me the belief.
That's 100% right. I mentioned my age, but I was in a conference in Atlanta 2 weeks ago. And it was a great networking opportunity, but completely invested in myself. I paid out of my own pocket. I didn't have any sponsors or, and you factor in everything, and I paid for like a VIP dinner just to be in the same room with some people.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was $4,000 out of my pocket that I'm not going to get back in terms of that money. However, it's led to some like connections. Actually, in 3 hours, I'm doing another podcast with someone I met at that dinner. And then I also did a podcast during that same conference based off a connection I made. And it's actually coming out tomorrow. Even before that, I know you're a fan of Chris Van Vliet, and I'm a pro wrestling fan as well. So I invested in his podcast, Mastermind, last year. So it's kind of like coming full circle, because that's how I met Justin Shank.
Yep.
And then Justin Shank is how I learned about you. And so just, and here we are today.
Yeah, it's really cool. The internet's so cool how we get to connect with people we just would not have otherwise had the opportunity to connect with.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, so what negative impact does limiting self-belief have?
I think it's everything. I think if anything in life, we're looking for we're going to get what we look for in life.
Yeah.
And if we have these beliefs that don't serve us, that were programmed into us from our parents, from the system that society placed us in. I mean, I was just speaking on this. Like I said, I had a podcast with Dr. Tom Walters right before this. The amount of people that I know that went to college for psychology or neuroscience, whatever it may be, and I know more about it than they do. When I never stepped foot on a college campus, blows me away. But in the reality of it, it doesn't blow me away, because everything I ever learned in school has no actual value in real life. And so most of what we learn is going to come from us doing our own work and putting that into place. And so if that's true, then most of what we learned isn't useful to us and is actually destructive to us, because it's either helping us or hurting us, and it's actually hurting us. And so most of our beliefs, or the frame that we see the world through, doesn't serve us. And so if we're looking out for what we don't want, we're moving towards it. And so I think that I can go so much deeper into that, but that in itself, just the awareness of it, is transformational.
So I have this whole thing about I can't stand college, and unless you're going to college for a certain field, whether medicine or law or engineering, whatever the case may be, it's just I feel like I've learned more off of YouTube or just by actual life experience than, that's a whole different rabbit hole. So for belief, what do you say to people who are quick to dismiss you simply because of or even doubt you simply because of your age?
I would say that they aren't my people, but I would think that would be wrong, because I think a lot of people have that perception to begin with when they first come across my work. But I think anyone that gets to know me realizes that my age isn't really my age. What I mean by that is the amount of people this year that have told me that I have an old soul, or that I've lived many lives, you can phrase it in however you feel, is more than people that say, dang, you're 21. It's like so many people are surprised by my age, not because, I mean, I definitely look young for sure, but I think wisdom doesn't really come from age, but it comes more from experimenting and not much experience, because, and I've used this analogy before, but there's people in their 70s, 80s. I think we've all experienced it when we're sitting on a plane and we're sitting next to an older man or older woman that wants to give us all the advice in the world from a place that they've done nothing in their life of any value. And so why would I take any, like, yes, you're older than me, you have more experience than me, but have you had more experiences than me? Have you actually experienced life to its fullness? The amount of people that I've been able to speak to that are in their 70s and 80s through this podcast is profound. I would much rather learn from people that are in a position that I'd want to be in rather than a position that isn't. And so I really don't think age has anything to do with my wisdom or the value that I can provide.
No, I love that. And that's great. You know, it's funny when I was talking about you earlier to my wife, I said, "Hey, I'm having this guy on, James Brackin, and you know, and I was telling her about your age, and I'm just super fascinated and a believer of you."
Yeah.
And I said, "But I would describe him as an old soul."
Yeah.
And so it's just funny that you mentioned that. By the way, I believe in you, and I know many others do as well. There's a wrestler that I want you to look up later, and I don't know if you watch wrestling, but I think maybe you'll appreciate it. But his name is Joe Henry, and he's just he's kind of like a motivational person. It's just he's got like this whole, and he's super popular right now. But it just it made me you remind me, it made me whatever, I think you remind me of him or vice versa.
I'll definitely check it out. Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah, of course, man. What was like, did you have like early on, like an initial aha moment that gave you you're like, you know what, I want to, and maybe you've already answered this, but I kind of want to ask it in a different way. But yeah, did you have like an initial aha moment at an early age that gave you the confidence to try to contribute to people with inspiration?
I don't think in my life I had reasons to do it, but never a moment that was like, that gave me evidence to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I grew up not the most confident kid. I was outgoing. I was like the class clown. I wanted to be noticed, but not from a place of confidence, rather from a place of insecurity. And so not really, I didn't really have anything that made me think, man, I'm the one that is capable of doing this. It was just more so, like I said earlier, I wasn't pushed to do it. I felt pulled to do it. It was a calling. Like, it wasn't something that I felt like I should do. It was more so something that I needed to do. And I think most people are in that way. If they're doing anything, you feel compelled. And that in itself, when I spoke to Mark Sisson, who sold Primal Kitchen for like $200 million.
Yeah.
When I asked him what makes him do the things he does, is he just feels compelled to do it. And I think the same thing for me.
No, that's great. No, I love that. And I think even in some other episodes and it takes passion. Like you feel compelled. You've even shared in some episodes to where you would go out to your car because you didn't have internet connection in your room or whatever the case was.
Yeah.
So you'd go out to your car in the freezing New York winter, film, go back inside for an hour just to warm back up and go do it again. And that's being compelled and just having a passion for it. Your podcast is it's serving others, and even just the overall like this design of it and just what you preach to people. But in what way do you believe serving others through your podcast has changed your perspective on success and fulfillment?
I think it's made me really question what I believe is success as a whole.
Okay.
Like Mark Sisson, I can mention there's plenty others that I've had on the podcast that have sold their business for hundreds of millions of dollars, or they're currently running a business that has done hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily define those people as successful. Not to say Mark Sisson, as an example, isn't successful. I think he's doing some amazing things and he's living a great life. But I think there's a lot of people, for example, Annie Sarnblad is someone I spoke to recently, and she's a micro-expressions expert and is working with plenty of billionaires and people that are really, really high up in companies. And when we were speaking, she was telling me how most of the people, pretty much every person she works with, is unhappy. I mean, they have hundreds of millions of dollars in their bank account, but they're unhappy. And it made me really think about a lot of the things that we define as success are measurable things: money, status, followings, whatever it may be. Like it's something that we can see. I would take more value in the things we can't see. Like I would find a yogi more successful than someone that's running $100 million company but doesn't spend time with their family. You know what I mean? So I think it's figuring out what do you define as success and almost just questioning what that is, because what you want and what you're supposed to want are two different things. And I think we've been taught what we're supposed to want and not so much of what we actually want. And I don't think people really get down to questioning what it is they actually want. And I think for me, I'm still trying to figure that out of what I actually want. So I think it changes as the day goes on, honestly.
No, it's great. I think you're right. And is that kind of how you would say your answer would be if someone asked you, like, how do you measure success or your own internal measurement of success? Would that be the same response that you just had?
I would say so. I'd add one more thing that has stuck with me for a few years, and it's that the way people have asked me on plenty of podcasts before is the way I would answer it is my success is my standards. Is am I doing what I said I would do? I am successful. If I'm not doing what I said I would do, my reputation with myself is diminishing, and that's not. I'm not okay with that.
Now, there was I think a podcast. It was Tim Ferriss for sure. I forgot who the guest was. It's been 5 or 6 years since I heard the episode, but it changed my outlook on success because the whole person's perspective was define like what is your rich. That's your measurement of success. So, for example, and he did like this whole study. And if you're already familiar with this, forgive me or feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, people are happier when they define their own rich. So the examples he gave were people said like one person, their rich was the ability to do their entire monthly grocery shopping at Whole Foods, all the grocery shopping, and not stress out about it. And that's pretty expensive. Or
Yeah.
every time they have or someone else was, every time they have a flight that's longer, I think, than 4 hours to fly first class. And again, not stress out about, oh, now we have to eat PB&J for the next 3 months to cover this cost. So that really altered my mindset.
Yeah, I think if you have 100 million in the bank or 140 million in the bank, I don't really think that extra 40 is going to do much for you. I think once you get to a certain extent where I think for a lot of people, this could be wrong, but I think a lot of people want to get to a point where they don't have to think about money. And then anything additional is just gravy.
Sorry, shout out to my dog in the background. He can sense his arch nemesis, the husky across the street. So funny. Hey, on episode 2 of your podcast, you talked about the whole episode was about your 4 Ps: passion, purpose, persistence, and patience. Are those still the same, or if they are still the same, how has that evolved over the past, I guess, 3 years or whenever that episode was created?
Yeah, in December, dude, it'll be 4. So it's crazy to think about. I forget that I did 105 solo episodes nowadays because I'm doing, an interview a week. But no, I think that stayed true, honestly. I feel like I haven't listened back to any of the podcasts I've done in a long, long time. But they probably stick to be true because honestly, at that time, like you said, it was like a compulsion to have to do it. When it was freezing out, I'd sit in my car. I couldn't put the heat on. Same thing for when it's hot out. I couldn't put the AC on. But it was more so for me than anyone else. I mean, hopefully it would provide some value, but it was like a public journal. And so anything that was true then probably is true now.
I'm gonna write that down. That's a way to look at podcasts as a public journal.
I heard Case Kenny, if you know who that is.
Yeah.
I had him on, and he said that his is still a solo episode, or still solos now, and that's how he framed it. And I was like, when I was doing solo episodes, and I'll definitely get back to him eventually, but I definitely feel that aligns with me. It's just like something that I learned, reframing it in a way that makes sense for me, and hopefully providing value to someone else because my frame of explaining it is going to be different from how I heard it. So I think my lens is valuable to some people.
And I'm going to copy Justin Shank because he talked about, it might have been your episode. And I watched your guys' where he was a guest on yours and vice versa.
Yeah.
But when he's gone, he wants his lips and his podcast account hosting site to stay open because he wants his podcast to continue to be heard for generations. And I thought that was so interesting. That's something I'm copying as well. I'm going to add to my will.
Absolutely. That's why we do it, right? So we can be gone forever.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed during your interviews is that you are absolutely an exceptional interviewer. It's incredible, and it's a master class, I think. Discuss the power of asking questions, and also as a side to that, Chris Van Vliet actually said this in a podcast maybe like 2 years ago with Travis Chappell, to where so much of our lives depends on the quality of the questions that we ask. But anyway, please just share your thoughts on the power of questions.
Yeah, thank you again. I think it's similar to belief, and it is the foundation that is creating our life experience. It is the glasses, it's the color on the glasses that we wear. It's the air that we breathe. It's everything. It's everything. When you think of, and I'll give you the example, when you ask me, is there something that made me start podcasting or want to impact people? There was a moment in my life when I stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And I started asking, how is this happening for me? I know you've heard it if you've listened to any podcast I've done. I explained this many times. But it really is like the moment that instantly everything changed. Not in a tangible way, but in the way that I framed my experiences. And I think that in itself is everything, because Justin explained this on my podcast. I've heard it plenty of times, of the father that had two sons, the alcoholic father that had two sons. I mean, one became an alcoholic, one became successful. Their reasoning was because of their father. And so the questions that you ask yourself are going to, your brain is kind of like ChatGPT, and the questions are the prompts. And so if you're giving yourself a negative prompt, why is this happening to me? ChatGPT is going to give you an answer based on the prompt that you gave it. You have to be specific. Same thing with your language that you use. The language, if someone tells me that they're going to try to do something, I automatically know they're not going to do it. If someone tells me that they should do something, I automatically know they're coming from a place of shame, because should is only shame. Like, just the language that we use and the questions that we ask create our experience and the way that we approach life. Because life isn't, you don't experience life, you experience how you perceive life, your experience of life. And so I think it really is everything. And I'm always trying to find questions to better ask myself. When I had Seth Godin on the show, he told me to create a guidebook of 365 questions that I ask. Currently working on that now, because I think that even if I were to only use it, it would be transformational for me. Because if everything is going wrong, ask yourself a better question. I bet you the situation gets better.
I have since I don't know if he's openly talked about that, but I have a question bank that I've created that has about 250 questions of
Hell yeah,
just different thoughts that I have, and these are I'm definitely known for being a notebook person. I have notebooks everywhere in my life, whether it's in my car, at work, all around the house, in my garage, because if I hear something, I'll write it down real quick. And those are questions I think about asking myself, for future reference or even potential podcast guest. I actually used ChatGPT. I was curious. Actually, there was a prompt. I used ChatGPT when prepping for this interview, and the prompt I used was provide a question to ask podcaster James Brackin IV, who became a personal coach at age 17. I'm going to share that question with you real quick. I think you actually already answered it, though.
maybe.
What strategies did James Brackin IV use to overcome self-doubt and establish a successful online platform at a young age? That was a ChatGPT response. One question I did want to ask, talk about the importance, or just, I heard you mention something in an episode, and I would love for you to discuss it more. Invisible progress and the importance of it.
Yeah. I was just speaking about this on the podcast. I was speaking to Tom Walters before. I think most of our life, at least for me, and I'm a very action-driven person. If I can't do anything about it, I'm just going to take action on it. And I'm a day-to-day kind of person. When people ask me, I'm so young, what's your dream vision 5-10 years down the road? I'm thinking the whole purpose of life is to enjoy the passage of time. I couldn't tell you where I'm going to be in 2 months from now, physically, mentally, business-wise. I don't even know. I have no idea. And so who am I to think that I have any kind of idea of where I'm going to be and actually hold true to it? So for me, invisible progress is the day-to-day of, you're not seeing any kind of result. Meditation, for example, you don't see anything from that physically. Reading a book, you may not get anything from it physically. Showing up and reaching out on social media to get guests on your show, you may not see it visibly. It may take 3 months, like sales does, where you do something today and it shows up, your results show up 90 days down the road. I kind of treat life like that, in a sense, of everything in life, really. I may not get the result now, and it may feel invisible to me, but I'm just going to take action on it and just trust in the universe that it's working in my favor, because I'm doing the work. And so I think just showing up, most of life is just that invisible progress of just doing something and not needing it to work out, because that detachment is almost what makes it work out, because you show up more. When I started the podcast, when I was doing solo episodes, I had no detachment, or I had no attachment to people watching it. It was just more so, I need to do this. And so that invisible progress, I wasn't getting downloads. I wasn't getting people watching. Like, I wasn't getting anyone really paying attention, but I was doing it anyway. And so I think it's kind of like the infinite game that I think Simon Sinek talks about it. It's like in anything in life, if you can do something and even if you were to fail, you still get something from it, do that. And I think that's what the core of invisible progress really is.
Now I love it, especially the part about meditation. John McCaskill, Macaskill, he was on episode 18 of my podcast. I think he'd be a great fit for yours if you're interested, but he's a retired Navy SEAL commander turned mindfulness teacher. And that's his whole premise now. And it's just about meditation and the actual name. He's a co-host of a podcast called Men Talking Mindfulness with his buddy Will. Anyway, it's really good, man. And it's really cool to hear him talk about it because he was in Iraq and Afghanistan and all these different things as part of the SEAL teams. And for him to talk about the importance of meditation and just being at peace with yourself. Yeah,
it's everything.
Can you share an experience or a specific instance when you faced rejection while trying to book a guest for the show or your podcast? How did you stay motivated and persistent in the face of that challenge?
Yeah, two experiences come up for me. Chris Voss, the hostage negotiator. Yep. Took me about a year to get him on. A whole year of following up. And when people ask me, how'd you get this person? How'd you get that person? It's like, I sent 90 emails when you sent one, you know what I mean? And so,
Sorry, on the side note, it took me a year and a half to get Ryan Hawk on my podcast. And I read 2 of his books. And in one of his books, he talks about how to book guests. And I'm like, and I used his formula in the book and it worked. But it was, anyway, sorry. That's invisible progress. I think that people don't realize that.
No, it is, right? I mean, the other one that is even funnier, honestly, is Dr. Michael Gervais, who hosts Mastery. And best-selling author, worked for the Seattle Seahawks, and like amazing human. I really love his work.
He's a mental performance coach, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And when I went to get him on, I reached out to his team. I was in contact with his assistant for so long. We finally get to the podcast, right? We're 5 minutes into the podcast. Statewide power outage. 5 minutes into the podcast, done for. I reach out to his team again, didn't hear back. Reached out to his team again. I finally get him on like 3 months later. And that was like another 8-9 months of like just trying to get the person on. But there's been many other people where I've tried to reach out. Like Peter Crone is someone that I've tried to get on the podcast so many times. And I guess what I'll get to is the belief that I have, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. Every single person, I don't see any of it as rejection. It's just kind of reminding me like, hey, I'm not ready yet. That's okay. It'll happen in the future. And so I just trust that everything's happening. I really believe that everything is happening for a reason. Even if it isn't true, that belief does serve me. And so I don't think anyone has been rejected. It's just like, okay, I just have to wait a little bit more because I really believe I will get anyone I want. And I think that's the belief that you have to have a podcast or really anything.
I love it, man. There's where is it? Oh, this book right here. This is my book of guests, and within this book, I have all my guests in here that one day I will have guests.
Yeah.
And it's about 100 names.
Good.
But it's just, 2 sides of the paper and all that stuff. And it's so good because at the end of every episode, I'll cross someone's name off, and it just it's such a great feeling.
Hell yeah.
No, I love that.
Every podcaster should do that, is create a guest list, because you'd be like a dream guest list. You'd be surprised how many people you could get if you just put down a guest list, because most people couldn't even create 100 people they'd want to speak to.
Yeah. So like, it's crazy to say that and leveraging your own network too, because my first ever podcast episode was with General John Jumper. He used to be the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, which is the highest ranking Air Force military member, 4-star general. He was the very first guest on my podcast. I didn't have a name for my podcast. It was just, I wanted to start like a mentorship type podcast, and I leveraged my network and then some other people, but I've had some non-military people on, civilians too. And like Ryan Hawk and Justin Shank were two whales for me personally. And I was like, holy crap, man, this is really cool. But
hell yeah.
Yeah. Hey, do you mind if we talk about like your dad and grandfather and your uncle a little bit? Or is that too much of a sensitive subject?
No, man, like I said, everything's it'd be really hard to find something that's off topic. I just if
Yeah.
I can support people and provide value, man, wherever you want to go with the conversation, I'm here for it.
So we have a shared experience because my dad died when I was 11 years old, and how old were you? I know your dad and uncle both passed away at the age of 37, but how old were you when they passed away?
I was 6 for my father, and I think I was probably 11 or so for my uncle. I'm not sure,
Yeah,
honestly.
I mean, just very formative, and
Yeah.
I get like how that feels, and that's something that's really resonated with me. But and of course, your grandfather passing away shortly before his retirement.
Yeah.
What is the importance of turning pain into purpose, and why is that? Why is that so powerful?
Yeah, I think it's like you said earlier, the questions that you ask yourself and the belief and the experiences and kind of the way that you approach life, because with the way that you frame your experiences is it's going to be everything, really. I
Yeah,
mean, growing up with losing all the men in my life that were like the most foundational men in my life, all passed, all unexpected. No one could have predicted any of it. It was just felt like it didn't make any sense. Now, I mean, even trying to make sense of it is almost the purpose of life. Is like whatever the purpose of life is, whatever you believe the purpose of life is. Like just trying to make sense of things that you can't make sense of. And I think for me, when someone passes in your life, we often live as though we're never going to die because we can't conceptualize it. Like no one can predict what's going to happen after death. No one can even picture it because we have no idea of what it's going to be like. But we still live as though we're not going to die because of that. And I think for me, growing up with many people passing away in my life, at first I felt like, why is this happening to me? These are the most important people in my life. And then it was this realization of, well, now I get to create my own identity, not carved after anyone before me because they're not here. I'm not convoluted by their preconceived notions or perceptions that would probably, though their biases that probably wouldn't serve me. I mean, there's so many positives that you can get, but I think in your life, we're always looking for the things that we want, like the biggest dream goals, buying a house, buying the Lambo or whatever it is, like the small things that we think are the biggest things in our life. The reality of it is that when you get to the end of your life, the things that are really gonna make you who you are isn't the things that you've done, but it's the things you went through. And so I'm very grateful for the things that have happened in my life, and that's the best way I've been able to kind of see them for my benefit.
that's deep, man. That's powerful. Are there any conversations you regret not having with either your grandfather, your dad, or your uncle?
To be completely honest, I heard my dad's voice for the first time like last year through a video. So I don't remember anything. Um, Not really. I don't think I was in to give myself some graces. I don't think I was conscious enough to even
Yeah,
have, because I truly believe, and this is, I don't know what it is over these past few years, but I feel like I've lived two separate lives. I really do. Like I feel like when I started my podcast, coaching, and everything else, my life actually started. Like I don't know who the quote was from, probably Teddy Roosevelt or someone, but you have two lives, and your second life starts when you realize you only have one. And that quote really stuck with me because over these past few years, I realized like a lot of my memory from my childhood, and I'm diving in with a lot of psychologists and psychotherapists and people like that from like somatic work on the podcast to dive into this, but I don't remember a lot of my childhood. So I couldn't tell you a conversation I did have, to be honest, let alone one that I wish I did.
has that loss shaped your approach to personal development? And are there like any specific books or podcasts you credit for your actual growth?
I was actually making a YouTube video on this morning. Obstacle is the Way is one of the best books I think everyone needs to read. Truly, like I really love that book.
I'm gonna write that
Psycho-Cybernetics
down.
by Max. Have you read it?
No, I'm writing it down.
Man, so many good things. I have multiple tattoos in my body from that book. Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz came out in like the 60s, 1960s. I read it. I listened to it on audiobook, and I
Yeah,
think that's a book everyone needs to read to understand the self-image, and it's just so good. It's so good.
that's
Breaking the
good.
Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza.
Yeah,
I mean, dude, like you can see the amount of books I have behind me, and this is only
yeah.
half. Yeah, there's so many I could dive into, honestly.
I'm trying to like squint in and see like which ones
So
I've
many,
read,
dude.
but
Like
no,
behind
it's
me, it's insane.
so I started my pod. So that's great because I graduated high school in the year 2000, and like most kids in English, like we had to read books for English class and all that stuff. I really didn't read any books in my adult life until 2017,
Wow.
because I hated reading, unless it was like a football magazine or a sports magazine or article. But in
Right.
terms of actually reading a handheld book,
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. But I was part of a book club in 2017, and that book was Leading with Honor, and that by Lee Ellis, and that sparked my mindset with reading. Then I started reading all like Extreme Ownership and just all the different books. And since that time, I've read probably about 30 or 40 books in the past 6 or 7 years. So very proud of that. And it all leads to a great podcast guest.
It does. I thought it was fascinating because I'm similar to you. When I was in high school, I took pride in never reading a book because I thought it was like, I'm still going to pass, but I'm not going to read a book, man. And then I got out of high school and I realized I actually love reading if the book is actually valuable to me. And I thought, well, I still have questions after I read. The coolest thing in the world would be read the book and then talk to the author. And now
Oh
I get to
yeah.
do that. And I assume it's similar to you. It's like just the coolest thing ever. Never gets old.
Like I one day I will have James Clear on my podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
and Admiral McCraven, and there's so many more that I'm working on.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to go back. I have a fun question about your grandfather because I said I read, but I really listened. Again, he passed away before his retirement, and if I recall from Brady's podcast, you mentioned that he would gift you Yankees memorabilia. What is your favorite Yankees memorabilia from your grandfather?
It's crazy that you know that. On the other side of my room, actually, I have a Yankees baseball bat with a bunch of. I think it was 1993 when they won the World Series. Could be a different year. I know it was in the 90s. All signatures of people, which was really
Oh,
cool.
one of my favorite baseball. So I'm a huge baseball fan, and Paul O'Neill is one of my favorite baseball players of all time because he has one of the best swings, and he was so
Oh yeah.
pivotal to all those Yankees teams in the '90s. So if you're a Yankees fan, how are you also a Steelers fan? Because are you from and live in New York?
I'm in upstate New York. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned my grandfather giving me the Yankees stuff because my dad, he was the biggest Steelers fan I think that I've ever met. I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
I I got stuff from his that like couldn't even use it. Like he had a Steelers credit card. Like I don't even know how you get that. He to the depths of like I don't even know what to do with the Steelers stuff that he's given me or I've got from him. So that was it. It was just like programmed into me. I think Steelers is like I love the Steelers 1,000 times more than I like the Yankees, 1,000,000 times more. So like full on Steelers. That's a part of my blood. If you pull it out, it might be yellow. Might be black and gold, honestly. So yeah,
Oh, that's really cool,
that's
man.
how. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. I typically ask people like, "Hey, what's their favorite failure?" And if you have one, I'd love to hear it. But I want to reverse it with you. Do you have any failures you're looking forward to?
It's a good question. I don't know where I'd go with that. I think life in itself, like there's tiny failures we deal with every day. There's big failures, but in the grand scheme of thing, I think I was making a video on this right before this earlier today. That I think a lot of people think success and failure are like two different roads that they go down, and I think that success is just further along the road of failure. And so, and one of the going back to like reframing experiences, I used to do everything to avoid failure. Now I just see it as feedback. So I think every failure I experience is kind of like one I guess I'm actively trying my best to be open to, I guess, and see what I can gain from it. But there's nothing specifically that I can think of.
Now, and I know it's kind of a unique question, and even as I was like trying to formulate it, but I think I wanted to ask you that because you're such in a good way, a unique person, an individual, and it seemed like the perfect question to ask you. But yeah, that's a tough one, but I appreciate you trying. But how was fear, actually on staying on fear of failing, how was that actually a positive and productive motivational tool?
Yeah, I think the fear of failure was, and I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like a driving force in a way. Because as much as it holds you back, it also pushes you forward. Because it can hold you back from taking action. But once you've started to take action, well, then it's like, well, the fear of failure is going to be the thing that pushes me because I don't want to be seen as a failure. So now I have to show up. Now every single week you're going to get
Yeah.
2 podcast episodes from me. And so it's like just it really it holds you accountable to doing what you said you would do. I think failure is it's the greatest information rich experience that we can have. And I think if we see them as feedback rather than I'm the failure, rather than identifying with it, we see the benefit from it. I think a lot of people would search for it rather than try to avoid it.
No, it's good. I'm taking a note for that one too. A lot of quotes in this one. Sorry, I'm battling a little bit of a cold.
No need to apologize.
I have 2 last questions. So these are completely miscellaneous. There's no rhyme or reason. But when you think of a movie image that depicts motivation and inspiration, who or what comes to mind?
Don't know why this is the first one that came to mind, but this is the first one that came to mind for me. Do you know, I think it's called Invincible with...
With Mark Wahlberg?
Yeah, it is with Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah.
He was on the Eagles.
Yeah.
Don't know why that comes to mind, but that was the first movie that I thought of.
That's a great movie. Elizabeth Banks is in it. Greg Kinnear.
Love Mark
No,
Wahlberg.
that's perfect. It's a very inspirational movie.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. If there was a giant billboard, and I took this question's from Tim Ferriss, but I love it so much.
Yeah.
And I ask it at the end of every single episode. But if you had a giant billboard with your picture on it and message for the world to see, what would you want your billboard to say, and where would you want the billboard to be?
Does Tim Ferriss say what his answers are?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Let me phrase that. Like he probably
Yeah.
has because he's done like 1,000
For
episodes.
sure.
But
I'd love
not
to know
that
what
I'm.
his...
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious because I'd love to know what his are. I think for me, what comes through to me right now is something that I think I'll probably write a book on in the future is choose to believe. Because I think a lot of us, whether it's a belief that we're trying to unlearn or believing in ourselves, we forget that we have the choice. And in the moment, we often just go to our automatic response. But if we're able to choose to believe or change our beliefs, whatever it is, I think we often live passively and we forget that we have a choice in most things. Where I'd like it to be, that's a tough one. Because like my automatic thought is like Times Square, but I hate Times Square, if I'm honest with you.
How about Heinz Field?
Let's do that. Yeah, I'll do that. We could do that. Hell yeah. Sounds in alignment. It's in my blood for sure. Let's do that.
Hey, do you have any parting shots or parting thoughts?
Just thank you for taking the time to speak with me, man. Reaching out. Really, really appreciate the conversation, thoughtful questions, the research.
Thanks.
Nah, man, just you're doing great stuff, and I'm grateful to play a part in it.
Absolutely. If you want people to learn more about you, where would you like them to go?
James Brackin IV on pretty much all socials, and I think you can even find that on YouTube, where most of the podcasts kind of get from. And then you can too on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Like I said on YouTube, it's under James Brackin IV. But I think if you looked up, you can too. You probably see me too.
And I'll link all this in the show notes and all that. James, thank you so much for joining my podcast. I didn't learn about you until recently, but to me, you were a must-have, and I instantly wrote your name in my book. And so thanks for doing this. Dude, I'm impressed, man. And just so you know, I look up to you, and I'm a big fan.
Man, it means the world. Thank you, brother.